Hey everyone, Dana here. Yes, even apples are different in Germany and the US. Even freaking apples. Don't believe me? Then stick around to find out some of the apple differences that I have noticed in the two countries. And even if you do believe me, stick around as well to find out some of the apple differences I've noticed. Some of them might surprise you. And yes, there is also a German version of this video. Link to the German version of this video down in the description box below. This first difference, however, probably won't surprise you. What do cars, shampoo bottles, fast food, soft drinks, and apples in the US have in common? That's right, they're all bigger than their counterparts here in Germany. Now, obviously, the exact size of each specific apple is going to differ from apple to apple and also from store to store, and perhaps even the time of year that you buy the apple. But from my experience, the average size of apples that I consumed in the US was generally bigger than the average size of apple that I get in Germany. This here, for example, is an apple that Mr. German Man bought in Germany. In the US, I recall the apples that I ate often being so big that I couldn't really finish it. It was often just too much apple for me for one portion of apple, I guess. So I often shared my apples with someone, like with my parents, also as an adult. Whereas here in Germany, I still share my apples often with Stefan, but I find that the apples are either exactly the right amount or even sometimes a little too small for me. So I think that if I ate this apple, for example, which as I said, Stefan bought here in Germany, I think it would be a little too small. I think afterwards I would still want a few more bites of apple. Another difference is how colorful the apples are. Donna, what do you mean by that? Apples look like apples, right? In both Germany and the US, my go-to apple is often the green Granny Smith. And while Granny Smiths are quite distinctly green in both Germany and the US, the Granny Smith apples that I saw and bought in US grocery stores somehow often seem to be even greener and brighter than the Granny Smiths here in Germany. And I also recall them tasting a bit more sour in the US too, but that could just be my perceived memory. So please let me know in the comments, what have been your apple experiences in different countries? Have you noticed the same kind of apples looking and or tasting different in different countries? And look at that, we're only a few minutes into the video and now we are already to difference number 3. How the apple feels in my hands, because yes, that's right, that is different too. At least from my experience. So growing up in the US, my family, we had this special fruit and veggie spray sitting next to the kitchen sink that we often used to clean off our produce before eating it because, for example, the apples that we got were often very waxy on the outside. So when I held the apples in my hand in the US, it often felt quite waxy and kind of like shiny. Whereas here in Germany, for example, this apple here, I do not have that waxy feeling holding this apple. This is an apple that Stefan bought at a supermarket in Munich. This is not an organic apple. And yeah, it doesn't feel waxy like the apples that I grew up eating in the US. It's smooth, but not waxy. Now, I will admit, it has been a little bit of time since I've actually bought an apple in the US. So please let me know in the comments, do many apples in the US still have that waxy feel on the outside? And people here in Germany, are there some apples in Germany that are waxy like that too? This next difference is not about the apples themselves, but how I have seen them in grocery stores. Here in Germany, at the grocery stores that I've been to, apples usually seem to be situated in/on a shelf, which is usually a little bit slanted so that you can easily see and access the apples. I'm not explaining anything new here. This is your typical grocery store fruit and veggie shelf. And I also feel like I've mostly noticed the apples here in Germany being located around the perimeter of the produce department rather than right in the middle of it. In the US, I have also often seen apples situated in a shelf like that in grocery stores too, but I can also recall from grocery stores in the US something that I have never seen here in Germany, and that is apples being piled or stacked in these little like apple pyramids right in the middle of the produce department. Not in all grocery stores, but in some grocery stores in the US, yeah, you had these like apple pyramids, which is something I cannot recall ever seeing here in Germany. And lastly for this video, we've got some apple sayings. In English, one compares apples and oranges, whereas in German, you're literally comparing apples and which kind of fruit? Not oranges, pears. Äpfel mit Birnen. There's also the saying in English, a few bad apples, which sometimes seems to get used incorrectly. In fact, exactly the opposite of what the saying actually means. People sometimes say it was just a few bad apples to mean that the bad apples in the group don't reflect the rest of the group as a whole. But that's actually not what this saying means, but rather that a few bad apples ruin the whole bunch of apples. Like imagine if you have a barrel of apples. If there are a few rotten apples in that barrel, that could contaminate and negatively affect all the rest of the apples in that whole barrel. So the saying a few bad apples actually means a few bad apples could spoil the whole barrel of apples. In German now, there's the saying in den sauren Apfel beißen, which literally means to bite in the sour apple, but we don't say it like that in English. However, in English, there is the saying to grin and bear it, or with bite, to bite the bullet. So my question for you is, what apple differences have you noticed? Have you noticed the apple differences that I mentioned in this video? And what other apple-related sayings do you know in German, English, or any other language? Please let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. For more content from me, you can follow me over on my Instagram at Wanted Adventure. I usually do my Instagram stories in German with little English subtitles. And speaking of German, I also, as I said, made a German version of this video. Link to that down in the description box below. And a really, really, really big thank you so much to our patrons on Patreon who help make these videos possible. Thank you so, so, so very much for your support. Until next time, auf Wiedersehen.